You're in the middle of your own spiral, the kind where you haven't eaten properly in 2 days and the thought of sitting quietly alone with your own head makes you feel vaguely sick. And your phone buzzes. A friend is having a hard time. And you feel it immediately, that little exhale of relief, because now you have somewhere to put yourself. You close the tab you had open about your own thing and you start typing, asking questions, thinking through their situation. You are, in this moment, completely present for someone else, and it feels like care. It feels like love. It feels, honestly, like you. But underneath it, just barely underneath it, thin enough that you've never had to look directly at it, is something else. The small, embarrassing truth that their crisis gave you somewhere to go that wasn't inside yourself. That you were a little bit grateful for the distraction. That helping, right now, is easier than whatever was waiting in that other top. Most people who are told they care too much are not wrong to care. The caring is real. But the timing of it, the way it arrives like a rescue when you need rescuing yourself, that's worth sitting with. Because there's a version of helping that is genuine and clean and freely given, and there's a version that is something else entirely, and they feel almost identical from the inside. Maybe you recognize this, or maybe you recognize it in someone you love, the person who is always the one holding everyone together, who somehow has no time to fall apart themselves, who fills every available hour with someone else's need and calls it purpose. Both of you are welcome here, because what we're about to look at isn't a flaw in your character. It's a very intelligent, very exhausting strategy, one you probably built for good reasons at a time when it kept you safe. There are a few different shapes this takes, and some of them look nothing like each other on the surface, but they share the same architecture underneath. We're going to go through them, and somewhere in here you are going to feel the specific discomfort of being described accurately. That is not a comfortable feeling. Try not to look away from it. But first, we need to name what's actually happening, because the word helping is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and it's covering something that psychology has been documenting for decades in a way that nobody really wants to say out loud. Here is what is actually happening. When your sense of yourself, who you are, what you want, what you feel, whether any of it is okay, is genuinely threatening or unclear, or just too loud to sit with, your nervous system finds an exit. Not a dramatic one, not running away or going numb or picking a fight. A quiet, socially acceptable, even praiseworthy exit. It turns your attention outward, towards someone's needs are concrete, whose pain has a shape, whose situation calls for a specific kind of response that you happen to be good at. Someone else's problem has direction. It points toward action. Your own pain, by contrast, just sits there, diffuse and patient, not going anywhere. Psychologists studying what's called self-concept clarity, essentially how stable and coherent a person's internal sense of self is, have found something that shouldn't surprise you. People with lower self-concept clarity are significantly more likely to engage in excessive helping behaviors. Not because they don't care, but because when the self is an uncomfortable place to be, the self-focused question, what do I need? What do I feel? Who am I when I'm not useful? Becomes quietly unbearable. And someone else's needs answer the question you're too afraid to ask yourself. Who are you? You are the person this person needs right now. That is enough. That is, sometimes, everything. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest form of generosity, but there is a version of attention that is given to others precisely because you cannot bear to give it to yourself. And the cruelest part is that it looks from every angle like virtue. There is the first version of this that most people recognize, the one that comes out looking like helpfulness but feels from inside like compulsion. You are sitting with someone who is upset. Really upset, properly upset, the kind of crying that doesn't have neat edges, and within about 60 seconds of them starting to describe what happened, your brain is already generating solutions.
not because you don't feel for them, but because the feeling is genuinely uncomfortable, and moving toward fix it gives you something to do with the discomfort. You suggest things, you reframe, you ask questions that steer gently toward the practical. And when they don't want solutions, when they just want someone to sit in it with them, you feel a specific flicker of panic that you probably don't examine too closely. The mechanism here is not coldness, it's the opposite. You feel their pain too acutely to stay in it with them, because sitting in it requires you to sit in it too. And somewhere in there, the edges between their pain and something older in you start to dissolve. So you move, you solve, you help. It feels like showing up for them, and it is partly, but it is also a way of managing your own nervous system by keeping your hands busy and your role clear. The wound underneath this one is usually something like, staying with pain, my own or anyone else's, has never felt safe. At some point, very early, the move that worked was to get practical, to be useful, to do something, and doing something became who you are. So when someone you love sits in front of you broken and all they need is for you to stay, can you? Can you sit with them without fixing, or does the urgency to solve feel less like love and more like need? Then there is the quieter, slower version of this, the one that doesn't show up in a crisis. It shows up in the texture of ordinary weeks. You are the one who remembers birthdays and asks follow-up questions and checks in after hard conversations and makes sure everyone has what they need. You do not experience this as self-sacrifice. You experience it as just who you are. But every so often, usually late at night or after a gathering where you drove the energy and nobody asks you a single real question, there is something that rises, not quite anger, something cooler than anger, a flat gray recognition that you give a great deal and receive almost nothing of equivalent weight, and that you have arranged your life to make this feel normal. The mechanism here is that your own needs were at some point either invisible or inconvenient. You learned accurately that the way to stay connected to people was to be useful to them. That need was the price of belonging. So you made yourself very, very useful. You became the person everyone can call. You built a self out of being needed. And it works until the day you hit empty and reach out and discover that the people you've been holding for years don't quite know how to hold you back. They didn't know you needed it. You never asked. What does your need look like to you? Not as a concept. Right now, in your body. Do you even know what it feels like to want something for yourself without immediately calculating whether it's reasonable to ask? There is another shape to this that is harder to admit because it involves not just where your energy goes, but who you choose to give it to. Think about the people you have been closest to in your life, the ones you loved most intensely, the ones you would have done anything for. How many of them were, in some significant way, struggling? How many of them needed you in a way that felt underneath the worry just slightly like relief? Because being needed by someone who is suffering is not a small thing. It answers a question about your value in a way that being simply loved does not. Being loved requires you to be worthy. Being needed just requires you to show up.
The psychology here is uncomfortable. When your own worth feels conditional. When love has always come with an audit. When being enough has never quite been a settled question. A person in crisis is, paradoxically, safer than a person who is fine. The person in crisis needs you. You are their solution. That is concrete, measurable. You cannot fail at being needed the way you can fail at being loved. The wound underneath this one is almost always, I do not trust that anyone would stay if I had nothing to offer them. If I stopped being useful, stopped being the strong one, stopped being the one with the answers, who would I be to you? In the more terrifying version of that question, who would I be to myself? And then there is the fourth shape, the one that is hardest to name because it looks the most like simple kindness. You are the person people tell things to.
all of it. The marriages falling apart, the secret fears, the versions of themselves they don't show anyone else. You carry it well. You hold it carefully. You do not collapse under it or make it about you. And when people tell you things they have never told anyone, you feel something real and specific. A closeness, a kind of warmth that is hard to describe. You are let in. But you have also noticed, if you are honest, that this process travels in one direction. People let you in. You hold what they give you. And when things shift, when you are the one who needs to be let in, who has something to hand over, who is asking for the kind of presence you have given 100 times, there is often a gap. Not cruelty, just a mismatch. The relationship was calibrated for a particular shape, and that shape does not include you needing anything. You built the container so well that you disappeared inside it. And some part of you knew this was happening and let it happen anyway, because being the one who knows everything about someone is the closest thing to closeness that has ever felt available. And being known yourself has always felt, at some bone-deep level, like too much to ask. Here is what none of this means. It does not mean that your care is fake. It does not mean you have been performing your whole life, or that the relationships built on your giving were hollow. The caring was real. The love was real. The work of showing up for people, all of it real. What it means is that you built a home in other people's need, because the home inside yourself felt, at some point, unlivable. Not because you were broken, because you were smart. You found something that worked, something that gave you purpose and connection and a clear sense of your own value all at the same time. That is not pathology. That is adaptation. Intelligent, costly, exhausting adaptation. But here is the question it leaves you with. The self you have been avoiding, the one underneath all that usefulness, the one without a role to play, without someone to fix, without a crisis to attend to, what are you actually afraid you would find there? Because the energy you spend orienting away from it tells you something. You do not avoid things that are empty. You avoid things that are too full. You don't have to answer that right now, but it's worth asking whether the people you help most are getting the best of you, or whether the best of you is still sitting in that closed tab, waiting. If you've ever been handed a version of yourself you recognized but never quite said out loud, that's what this channel is for. Not to fix you, not to diagnose you, just to describe what you see when you look closely enough. Come back when you're ready for more. The question you'll carry out of this is probably not the one you wanted it to be. It's the one about what's in that tab.